Okay, I see it's 5:00. I see we have 6 members present, which constitutes a quorum. So I will call the October 16th, 2024 Transportation Commission meeting to order. Ariana, if you could please read the instructions.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ariana. Aiden, if you could call a roll, please.
Sure thing. So Juliana Bennett is excused. MGR Govindarajan may be running a few minutes late. Dina Nina Martinez Rutherford.
Present.
Barbara Harrington McKinney. Ann Kovich.
Here.
Robbie Weber.
Here.
Denise Jess.
I haven't heard from Denise, so I wonder if she's running late. Okay.
Pepe Barros.
Here.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
And Harold Cleaves.
Here.
Okay. Everybody have an opportunity to look at the minutes from the last meeting. Chris?
Move approval of the minutes.
There's a motion. Bill?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to object or abstain. So please raise your hand. Okay, the motion is carried. I was just checking to see if maybe we had any members in the attendees, but I don't see them. Okay. Do we have anybody registered under item 1 to comment on things not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay. Any disclosures or recusals this evening? Okay, seeing no hands. Move on to the consent agenda. Items 2 through 4 were proposed for the consent agenda. Do we have anybody registered to speak on any of those items?
We
No?
do not. No.
Okay. Are there any items which members wish to have separated from the consent agenda? Okay, I'm seeing no hands. So we have item number 2, Legistar 85435, item 3, Legistar 85518, and item 4, Legistar 85668, proposed for the consent agenda. Do we have a motion? Harold?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Robbie?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. I assume no discussion, but I'll ask. Okay, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote, unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, the motion is carried. So that takes us to item number 5, which is related to the TDM proposed changes to the TDM ordinance. Trent, I assume you're going to take that.
Yep. And then that would be together with agenda item 6 as well.
Well, actually, they're two separate items,
Okay.
so we'll need to have two separate votes because one of them is a recommendation to the Common Council, and item 6 is just requires TC approval. So your presentation may cover both of them, but we'll need to handle them as separate items for that reason. Okay.
Yeah, so I can start to share my screen here and provide
Okay.
the presentation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, so I am Trent Schultz, the Transportation Demand Management Coordinator here within Parking Division. And today I'm going to be providing an overview of a few proposed ordinance amendments and then some updates to the TDM program, which supplements the ordinance and goes into a little bit more detail in different TDM measures and then research into peer cities with TDM ordinances. So with TDM, the ordinance took effect in June of 2023, and since then, 35 sites have received TDM plan approval. So they have either been new development sites, change of use. So, for example, going from restaurant to retail, and then also some instances of sites with increased parking. And all of those are sites that are potentially subject to the TDM ordinance. And just to reiterate, with the TDM ordinance, the intent is to require sites that are subject to the ordinance to provide infrastructure and amenities that encourage sustainable transportation options for people, and then as a result, decrease single occupancy vehicle trips and then lower vehicle miles traveled throughout the city. Some examples of measures can include having bike lockers within offices or residential development, providing free or subsidized bus passes to employees or tenants, and then things such as installing B-cycle stations next to new development, or more programmatic things like unbundling parking from rent. And the TDM ordinance is where applicants start by seeing whether their project needs to comply with the ordinance, and then to prove that they're complying with the ordinance, they submit TDM plans that they fill out specific information that's showing how much parking they have, and then the scale of development and a few other things. And then through that, they provide and select different TDM measures, which are what I mentioned before, as far as bike lockers and B-cycle stations, clothes lockers and showers, many other measures, which I'll get to later in the presentation. So I have been at TC quite a bit. The first time that I came to TC with specific ordinance amendments and changes to the TDM program was last November. And those amendments focused on adding additional uses to TDM that were uses either permitted or conditional within the zoning code, but weren't really addressed or spoken to within TDM. So it aligned uses subject to TDM with those that are allowed within the zoning code. And then you all also advanced changes to the ordinance that clarified review procedures. So just having more clarity on when a TDM plan would be required within the overall site plan review process. And then most recent time I was here earlier this year in July, I presented potential TDM ordinance amendments, and then align with that some potential changes to the TDM program that would complement those ordinance amendments. And then based on July's meeting, additional feedback that we've received from stakeholders and some internal work, today we will be recommending specific ordinance amendments, as well as having you all review and approve some changes to the TDM program. So there are two focus areas for the proposed amendments. The first is to look at modifying the way that parking ratio calculations are set up. So that is, what really is the crux of a TDM plan. It is what determines how many TDM points a project needs to provide. It is definitely something that has caused some administration problems, and then on the applicant side, some confusion. So the proposed amendments would seek to address that. And then the next area is looking at removing some use-specific exemptions. We have several exempted uses within the ordinance that, based on considerations, are brought to you to potentially be removed. So starting with the parking ratio calculation amendment, that would focus on looking at the box here in red, which is taken from the TDM program. So it, for institutional uses and educational uses, is currently the ratio of proposed parking to use-specific base parking. And that ratio has proven to be challenging, mostly because of using use-specific base parking, which is derived from the zoning code parking minimums. So related to this chart here, the ratio of proposed parking to use-specific base parking is what determines the amount of TDM points required. So, for example, 30,000 square foot institutional use that has a parking ratio that's greater than 2, that would be 22 TDM points. So TDM points are based on a lot of different factors. So starting off with use, that divides projects up into 4 use categories. So residential, employment, commercial, and institutional. And then those projects based on the use are reviewed with how big they are. So for residential, that's the amount of dwelling units. And then for all other uses, it's how many square feet of tenant space there are. And then location is also taken into account. So required TDM points decrease the further a project is away from the isthmus and high frequency transit. So that's the A through D routes that don't include their branches. And then the less parking a site has, the lower TDM point requirements there would be typically. So the parking ratio calculations differ between those 4 different use categories. So for residential projects, that parking ratio calculation is parking stalls per dwelling unit. And then for employment, it is parking stalls per 500 square feet of gross floor area. And then for commercial and institutional uses, so that's general retail, restaurants, hotels, hospitals, vet clinics, etc. That calculation is parking stalls per use-specific base parking. And as I was mentioning earlier, use-specific base parking has been particularly challenging, both on the staff administrative end and then as well as the applicant end. And just using a few examples of those base parking calculations really shows some of that complexity and also how tough it is in some instances to administer the ordinance. So just at the top, determined by zoning administrator is one example of a particularly challenging base parking or parking minimum where that is for a couple different uses within the zoning code, and with the way that the TDM ordinance is currently set up, I would have to use that and ask zoning staff to determine what the parking minimum is. And that's particularly problematic because of how many areas of the city we actually don't have any parking minimums. So that includes downtown and then the somewhat recently adopted transit-oriented development overlay district that has no parking minimums whatsoever. So in those two locations in particular, downtown and in the TOD overlay, zoning staff wouldn't actually have any parking minimum that they enforce. They don't have any parking minimums. So if a site within that area comes through the TDM ordinance, I would be in effect asking zoning staff to determine something that they, through their own ordinance, don't have to calculate. So it definitely creates a little bit of a rift and sort of a question and challenge for staff to figure out the best way to administer, and can be addressed by the proposed changes, which would be a much more standardized approach to the parking ratio calculation. So the proposed change before you today would change both commercial and institutional parking ratios to go from parking stalls per use specific base parking to instead be parking stalls per 500 square feet of gross floor area, which is consistent with the other non-residential use category, employment, which already uses that parking stalls per 500 square feet of gross floor area. So as part of considering the change to those two parking ratios, we looked at how many already approved TDM plans fit within either commercial or institutional use categories, and found that roughly a third of all of the 35 TDM plans that have received approval fall within those two categories. So this wouldn't be a change that would have a really small impact. It definitely would impact a lot of projects in the future, and making them, sort of from a city standpoint, much easier to administer, and then also from the applicant standpoint, much more user-friendly, where they don't have to dig way into the weeds of the zoning code or, ask staff for additional clarification. They would be able to figure out how many TDM points are required within their TDM plan pretty quickly. We also did an equity analysis to see, with any sort of change to that parking ratio formula, what sort of impacts there would be. And, definitely wouldn't forward any sort of recommendation to you all that had an overburdening impact on smaller tenant spaces, and some of those change of use sites where, in many cases, they're, not really expecting to need to meet TDM ordinance requirements and don't necessarily have the resources of a project where it's, a demolition of an existing building and a new building, that, they're spending millions upon millions of dollars on. We also didn't want to recommend any sort of parking ratio change that led to a huge increase or decrease in required TDM points, and feel that using the parking stalls per 500 square feet of gross floor area would accomplish that. And then, as well as, not really trying to recreate the wheel, using the parking stalls per 500 square feet of gross floor area is already in the ordinance, with, as I mentioned earlier, the employment uses using that parking ratio calculation. So moving on to removing use exemptions. Currently, there are two use categories that have use exemptions. So for commercial, that includes daycares, nurseries, and animal daycare facilities. And then institutional uses, that includes K-8 schools, both public and private, institutions with campus master plans, so that's UW-Madison, and then places of worship and public safety facilities. And public safety facilities is a use that last November did have some proposed changes, but based on feedback at the time from both Plan Commission and PC, and then as well as the most recent time that I was at PC, that use exemption is proposed to be removed. So in considering removing any use exemptions, we really wanted to look at ways to improve the TDM ordinance's consistency and predictability, and found that there are, a couple different instances where related uses don't really have an even applicability. And really, to expand on that point, what I mean is that, for example, animal boarding uses are subject to the TDM ordinance, but animal daycare is not subject to the TDM ordinance. It's actually in that exempted list. And so I've had at least one project come through that actually had both animal boarding and animal daycare. So, by removing that exemption, it could be something that, increases, not only from the staff end, but also the applicant end, better predictability and more consistency through the ordinance. And then also, really thinking of ways to increase the number of projects subject to TDM. Removing those exemptions would be a way to do that. And then looking at cities that have ordinances, TDM ordinances that have been around for a little bit longer, we looked at others and found that the majority of cities with TDM ordinances that have been around for, in some cases, more than a decade, don't have as extensive a list of exemptions as we do. They more so base their exemptions off of how many dwelling units there are or the square footage of a tenant space, which is something that we already do. So the proposed use exemptions before you today would be all of those that I outlined, with the exception of institutions with campus master plans. And as part of forwarding this recommendation to you all, we did do, as I mentioned before, the equity analysis and looked into some concerns potentially related to removing the exemption for daycare centers and nursery schools. And I'll later on in the presentation highlight a few examples of that and can definitely answer any questions related to those two specific exemption removals. So as part of considering the exemption removals, we wanted to look at the impact and other issues potentially with that, and did find that we expect small scale change of use projects that have a lot of on-site parking to be the sites that would likely be most impacted by removing those exemptions, and did find that new construction and maybe some larger tenant spaces might not necessarily be required to provide a TDM plan, even if that exemption removal is lifted. And do also want to highlight that being subject to the TDM ordinance does not necessarily mean that a site is required to receive TDM plan approval. So, for new construction, change of use, or sites with added parking, it doesn't necessarily mean that that site has to comply with the TDM ordinance. And then another thing that's built into the ordinance already is a up to 5-point discretionary reduction that staff can approve. And so far, out of the 35 sites that have received TDM plan approvals, there have been 2 that actually had points reduced from their required TDM points. So going back to considering daycares and nurseries and potential impact of removing them, I'll highlight 2 examples of sites that really show how the exemption removal could impact potentially sites differently. So this is an example of a daycare that was approved last year, and it's a relatively small tenant space, only 2,000 square feet. And based on it being a multi-tenant building with a lot of surface parking, it would actually, if it was approved with the proposed changes and proposed after that, would require 20 TDM points, which definitely is a pretty significant amount of TDM points, but is something that we looked at options for a business like this and what they would do, and did find that there didn't seem to be too many upfront costs associated with implementing those different TDM measures that could be an option to them. And then this is another site that shows a much larger tenant space for a daycare use that was approved in 2022 as a multi-story mixed-use building with the first floor daycare space, about 20,000 square feet. And based on the relative lack of parking, there's 60 total stalls and 38 dwelling units. That project, if proposed today and considering if the ordinance amendment is passed, no TDM plan would be required. So, I think there's many more examples from that, but definitely wanted to highlight how the applicability could be different, but there are still mechanisms in place to really look at some of those smaller scale change of use and have ways to not necessarily be a burden for people to gain occupancy, but actually be an asset if they're able to proactively look at ways to have carpooling or to have bus passes available to employees or different TDM things that can really allow greater access to daycare, not only for employees of daycare providers, but also of parents bring their kids into those daycares. So moving on to the TDM program changes, the first two areas are really to align the TDM program with the proposed ordinance amendments. So the first area is addressing the change to parking ratio calculations, which shows up in a lot of different places. So I'll highlight a couple of those, and then removing those use exemptions within a couple different areas. There are some changes that would be necessary to remove them, and then take out those base parking examples. And then lastly, I'll provide some new and revised TDM measures. So the commercial use table within the TDM program would change. And again, it would go from that parking ratio of parking stalls per use specific base parking to instead be parking stalls per 500 square feet of floor area. Nothing else within the table would change, so it wouldn't impact the number of TDM points required. It would just change that calculation for the parking ratio. And then that's the same with the educational and institutional use table, where it would be going from parking stalls per use specific base parking to parking stalls per 500 square feet of floor area. So moving on to the new measures for transit-related measures with the new fast fare cards out. We really wanted to align the different TDM measures related to transit with the fare offerings that Metro is now providing. So before there were, 1 or 2 day passes or 10-day ride cards. So we wanted to get rid of all those and really align it with the options out there for fast fare cards and for commute cards. So the first new measure is to provide fast fare cards. So that would require employers or property managers of apartments to provide fast fare cards without any fare value to all employees or tenants. And then the next measure would be to provide fast fare cards with fare value, which would be starting at 2 points as a TDM measure and would require every employee or tenant to have a fast fare card provided to them with at least $10 of fare value on that card. And then it would increase points for every additional $10 on that card. And then the next new measure would be to provide subsidized commute cards to all employees. And that would be 4 points. So it would be in instances where there's some cost in a way to employees, whether that's a payroll deduction or something else, or like a monthly or yearly fee. And then the next one is to have complimentary commute cards, which would be 7 points and not require any costs to employees. And then the last measure is something recommended for Metro, which would be to sponsor a shelter or bench. And that would be needing to be within a quarter mile of the site under consideration. And then it's not a new measure. It's the only one that's staying. That's existing within the ordinance right now, but funding transit stop amenities is still a transit-related measure, and that's currently 1 to 4 TDM points. moving on to parking related measures, based on some feedback and some analysis of projects coming through, we are proposing to add an unbundle sum parking measure. So currently there's an unbundling parking measure that's 10 TDM points, and it requires all parking on the property to be separated from rent and charged. So, just based on some projects that have come through that are away from transit access and different bike amenities, we wanted to provide some flexibility to acknowledge that, in most instances, those developments have some amount of surface parking that isn't charged. And so, this would be relatively small as far as TDM points at 3, but would require at least 75% of all parking stalls on the property to be charged and unbundled from rent. And then the next new proposed measure would be to have additional accessible parking. So that would require there to be at least one additional accessible stall past what the ADA requires for 1 point. And then for 2 points, it would be to provide more than one accessible stall above what is required. And then for shared mobility, currently there is a bike share related measure that offers complimentary bike share member passes. So this would just be offering subsidized bike share memberships or passes to just add more flexibility to those passes. And then the last area that I'll cover for changes to the TDM program would be revised or clarified measures. And these are mostly based on applicant feedback, and then also, internal considerations, just trying to make measures more specific and easier to say, here's what you need to do to an applicant to meet those measures and the intent of them. So the first would be to change delivery supportive amenities to be a secure area for deliveries. That is not changing any of the description of the measure, just really responding to a lot of questions from applicants as far as what that measure means, because a lot of people get that confused with the next measure, which is to have a package drop-off area, which is proposed to change to tenant and customer package drop-off area. So that measure is 2 points, and the intention behind that is to have an area within either a business or an apartment where tenants or customers can drop off a package and not have a separate trip specifically to a mail carrier. So, one example of that would be at Walgreens, where they have a FedEx package drop-off site within their customer service area. So that would count towards two TDM points currently, and just trying to make it clearer for applicants coming in. And then the last revised measure would be to just take out the or free for the carpool preferential parking. That was a question that someone asked to me, and I thought, why is the or free in there? So that's a proposal for that measure. And then for the last three, just looking to clarify how those apply. So not changing the measure name, but the description. So for closed lockers and showers, just to highlight that is not applicable for residential developments. And then for shared parking, it would add a specific reference to the zoning code that deals with shared parking and parking minimums, to add a bit more clarity for applicants who don't necessarily have a good sense, just in skimming the measure description, what that actually means. And then for the last one, flexible work schedules, that would define what peak hours are, which is 7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. So, it would allow someone to get TDM points if they have their employees working or coming to work or leaving work outside of those hours. So with that, there aren't any other changes to the TDM program that I have for you. So I'll open it up to any questions and discussion. And thanks for having me.
Okay, first let me ask Aiden, do we have anybody registered to speak on items 5 or 6?
We do not.
Okay, so we had a presentation which covers both items 5 or 6. If there's no objections, we could have discussions and questions on both 5 or 6. But as I mentioned earlier, we really need a separate motions or like a really complicated motion. So it might be easier just to have separate motions because 5 is refer from the Common Council, which requires a recommendation to the Common Council, and 6 just requires approval from TC. But we would need item 6 approval to be subject to adoption of the proposed TDM ordinance changes by the Common Council, because we can't adopt all the program changes until those ordinance changes are adopted by the council. But it makes sense to talk about them both at this meeting rather than come back again at a later time. So with that, if there's no objection, we can have questions and talk about them both, and then we can talk about motions when we get there. So comments or questions for Trent? A lot of information to cover. Any comments or questions for Trent? I'm not seeing any hands. It was very well laid out and very well documented, and we talked about it, as you mentioned once before. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, I will ask a question. Like, yeah, thanks for the presentation. Lots of thorough work. This seems like the kind of stuff where, like, yeah, we had a good ordinance, and now we realize that there are some things that can be improved upon. So the way I understood it with the change from the zoning code specified base ratio to something that's based on floor area, part of the issue here, I think you laid out 2 problems with that. One of them is that for many areas of the city, there are no base parking minimums. And the other one is because the zoning code is so complicated, where this use has this parking ratio and then this very similar but slightly different use has this base parking ratio. I think that's the other reason why we're looking at that simplification. Did I get that right?
Yep. Yeah, that was all accurate. I would say that, the intent behind this is just to make it easier to enforce the ordinance, and also, to separate the TDM ordinance from the zoning code, especially considering, a lot of the work that has been done recently to remove parking minimums, just to not really make it an extra burden on an applicant who, has to refer to those zoning code parking minimums where, zoning staff don't have to enforce those because they don't exist within a large swaths of the city.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. And then the other question I had related to the new TDM measures. I think you made a good case, like clarifying the language where some of the language was maybe not clear, or updating it with Metro, the fast fare cards. I mean, I guess it's a balance between very specific, but then also potentially a year from now, maybe the commute cards Metro is going to do away with. I have some recollection of some discussions about, like, how does the commute card fit into the scheme of the overall thing, or maybe with bike share, they just are going to have a new operator. Maybe that's going to change how their pass model works. And then I guess that would mean we would have to come back and potentially make more changes. So I guess that's the trade-off with being very specific, which is good for staff and the applicant, versus then potentially having to make regular changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
And those changes could just come back to TC, Harold. So they don't require council approval, but you're right. It would require another trip back to TC. Other comments or questions? Okay, for simplicity reasons, I'll entertain 2 different motions. One would be for item 5, to recommend approval of the TDM ordinance changes as proposed in the file. Harold,
So moved.
Alder Martinez Rutherford. Is that a second?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Okay, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm seeing no hands. And on item 6, a motion to approve. I would entertain a motion, hopefully a motion to approve. And that should be subject to adoption of the proposed TDM ordinance changes by the Common Council, because clearly we can't make these changes to the program unless the ordinance changes go through. So I would entertain whatever motion you would choose to make. Robbie,
Move to approve the changes subject to council approval. Does that sound right?
is that adequate, Eric?
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe just say common council approval of the ordinance changes, because we have some program changes that aren't ordinance changes.
The TC controls the program changes, so I think we could do that. There does become the question then of what if the council doesn't, approve exactly the same ordinance changes, but I think then at that point we'd come back and staff would present what, program items are in and out. So I think that contingency should work just fine as is. And if there's any deviation by the council, then this would just come back.
Yeah. So Robbie, if we say move to approve the changes subject to common council approval of the ordinance changes, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
That clarification. Okay. Is there a second? Alder Martinez Rutherford?
I will second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there discussion? Chris?
Yeah, I guess just a clarifying question. It doesn't seem to me that the changes to the TDM program should depend on changes to the ordinance. Is there a reason that these changes to the program couldn't take place even without changes to the ordinance?
Well, my understanding, I'll let Eric comment, is that we can approve program changes as long as they don't conflict with what is shown in the TDM ordinance or in state law. So if the council changes it, and makes it something different from what we're reflecting in the program manual now, then I don't think we could do that, because it would be in conflict with the TDM ordinance. Eric, your thoughts?
Trent may be able to give a better example off the top of his head, but some of the ordinance changes, then reflect, the sort of how-to that's laid out in the program. And your statement is exactly right about, the TC really writes and has full authority over the program, but then the ordinance has to be done by the council. So if you'd like, I could find an example here, but I basically some of the changes to the sort of framework of the ordinance, affect the parameters of the program. So we couldn't have some of these program changes without the ordinance changes.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Eric said with, the measures in particular, those, aren't in the ordinance. So those could be approved or denied. But then the parking ratio calculations are specifically called out within the ordinance. And then as well as the exemptions. So there's, a lot of extraneous language related to those, but it's still, tying back to the ordinance if it, is either the exemptions or the parking ratio calculation. So that I would say, I agree with what Ann was saying and what Eric was saying.
So some of them, I guess we could approve, Chris, and some of them we might have to come back and look at it again if the council chooses to approve something different. Other discussion? Very complex and a lot of very thorough work, Trent. I read all of those changes in the manual and a lot of detail orientation there to make sure everything matched up. So really good work. I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, great work, Trent. Thanks so much for everything that you've done on TDM, and keep us posted. Okay, thanks. We'll move on to item 7 then, which is North Shore Drive path. And before we get started, I believe we have somebody registered to speak. Is that right, Aiden?
Yep, we do.
Okay, so we'll hear from, I think Aaron's going to do that. Is that right, Aaron?
Yep. Yeah, that'll be me.
Okay, so we'll hear from Aaron, and then we'll hear from the public, and then we'll have our questions and discussion. Go ahead, Aaron.
All right, I'm sharing my screen. Can you confirm you see PDF exhibit?
We can, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, I'm presenting the North Shore Drive path to the TC tonight. This is not that path. This is, if you recall, this is from the John Nolan Drive upcoming reconstruction project. And I just wanted to show this at first to provide context. John Nolan, including the intersections at North Shore and Broome, the improvements there have already gone through the commission a number of times and has been approved. This is essentially what has been approved by you in the past, and I just wanted to show it to provide the base for the North Shore path. So the main thing from the John Nolan project that's new is adding a path along the north side of John Nolan within Brittingham Park, and a path along North Shore Drive that will be built to South Bedford Street. So with that background, the path that I'm presenting on is basically going to continue what John Nolan is going to build from Bedford Street onto the Southwest path. And this exhibit shows more clearly specifically what the North Shore Path project will construct. And to be clear, we are intending for this path to be built ahead of John Nolan Drive. We're looking at this being built spring 2025, and John Nolan is expected to begin construction fall of 2025, with construction going into 2026. So this will be built ahead of time, and that is the way we intended and planned for it. So first off, just design-wise, the dashed line work here in Brittingham is what is built with John Nolan. So the solid lines is what is going to be built with this project. Removing the right turn lane along North Shore Drive in order to make space for that future path with the John Nolan project. And then a little bit of sidewalk reconstruction and a raised crossing put in at South Bedford Street. And then essentially the whole project is reconstructing what is existing concrete sidewalk along the Findorf building here. This whole sidewalk is actually within Brittingham Madison Parks parcel. So effectively reconstructing that sidewalk to be a widened 10-foot asphalt path. Enough space there, and grading is easy enough to be able to squiggle things around and avoid any tree impacts. So, light on the impacts there, and it'll provide a connection into the Southwest path. And going back to the previous exhibit, sorry for jumping around a bunch. We specifically want to get this built ahead of John Nolan Drive going because it will provide another option when work is happening along John Nolan, along the Cap City Trail. It will help or be another option basically for the Cap City Trail detour that will be required for constructing John Nolan along the causeway. And it's really going to be a really nice alternative, especially for the east-west commuters, to be able to go from the Cap City Trail on the lakeside to get to the Southwest Path. Today, the Brittingham Path and the RFB crossing here serves that fairly well, but it's always good to have more options. And I think we're all familiar, like this RFB is very helpful there, but that is a pretty strong curve with somewhat high-speed traffic. So it's going to give options for folks who maybe don't feel comfortable there to be able to cross at the signalized intersection at either Broome, North Shore, get over, and then stay along the northwesterly side of North Shore to continue on the Southwest Path. Fairly straightforward project, really just kind of an addition to the John Nolan, but something that the city is doing as a separate contract and looking to do ahead of John Nolan. So I can open up to any questions.
Aaron, let's hear from the registrant and then go to questions. Who do we have, Aiden?
So we have Gabriel Hill of Presidential Lane. Neither supports nor opposes and wishes to speak.
Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, great, thanks.
Yeah, so my kind of issue or comment with this project is not with the path itself. I think the path is great. It's more how it interfaces with the intersection. It's this intersection and how it's been designed. You have to cross 2 slip lanes and a full intersection, whereas we know that these slip lanes are dangerous for pedestrians and bicyclists. Even the Federal Highway Administration calls slip lanes a negative facility from the pedestrian perspective. And the analysis from Strong Towns that we'll see later in this meeting of the death on, I'm not sure what street, I don't have the exact.
Prairie Road.
Yeah, Prairie Road and Raymond Road. Yeah, they even specifically call out slip lanes as the design of that road, Prairie Road, it works kind of similar to slip lanes. You can read the full report, and they talk about how dangerous slip lanes are, and their analysis of slip lanes have shown that they're really dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists, as I'm sure you all know. And just with the increased volume of pedestrian and cycling traffic that we're going to see here with both this trail and the possible Amtrak station under the terrace, that's, I think, the most likely place where it's going to be. It's not confirmed yet. But then also with the Olin Park and Monona Shore Revitalization Project, it just seems like this intersection is going to get so much more pedestrian and cyclist traffic, even though, I mean, it already gets a lot. And we've had 2 deaths at the intersection in the past 5 years, including 1 cyclist death. So it seems like the design that we have isn't conducive to like increasing safety. I know that the new design does narrow lanes, which I'm a big fan of, but the options presented when that design was picked, the only one that didn't have slip lanes was like it widened the intersection a lot, and it didn't have any option that slows small vehicles while allowing for trucks to use the intersection. So like, for example, a mountable curb or rumble strips or cobbles or speed bumps on that inner right turn from North Shore Drive. So, and if we eliminate slip lanes, we can also eliminate 1 lane on going west on North Shore Drive, because because with no turn on red that we have on that intersection, there's only ever 1 lane going in. So we could even narrow this intersection further on that north side. It just seems like we're adding, and I love that we're adding more pedestrian and cyclist options, but it just seems like the design of the intersection is not safe for the amount of pedestrians that we're going to have here. I don't know how much time I have, but also
You have a total of 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Am I over? Because I'll just.
You'll get a notice when.
Okay. I can stop here. There's also like we could back up with recessed stop lines, especially on that, on the North Shore Drive, because you always see drivers stop on that train track. But that's away from the path problem and more in the other problems with the intersection. So I'll leave that for a later date.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for the registrant? Alder Harrington McKinney.
Very much. I do have a question of the registrant. Are you an avid biker, and do you use this lane? You were giving some insightful. I'm not a biker, so please indulge me. Is that are you an active biker, and do you use this this lane build out that you were just talking to us about?
Yeah, so I bike this intersection a lot and I drive it a lot. So I this intersection is like my most like it bugs me a lot in the whole city. So but yeah, I do bike across it a lot, and I do see like a lot of like there is high bike traffic there. So I do like this new path because it allows for people to kind of avoid the intersection if they're just going southwest up towards the terrace. But yeah, the crossing here is just, I do like the new like waiting area, but the slip lanes are just, it always causes issues, especially because even though it is the right turn on red there from North Shore on to John Nolan going south, it is, you can't turn right on red anymore, but a lot of cars still do, which you'll see a lot of not actual accidents, but you'll see like bikers stopping and not sure if a car is going to go, and then a car maybe not seeing someone, and it's just a lot of close calls with those slip lanes, especially the slip lane from North Shore Drive on to John Nolan Drive going south.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question? Robbie?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, possibly for Alder Harrington McKinney, a lot of your comments are about the intersection of North Shore and John Nolan, but just to be clear, what we're considering tonight is that path that would essentially avoid the entire intersection. And I just want to be clear that, I just want to ask you if you have any concerns about this path that's being considered today, or any of the design elements, because you won't be crossing, you'll, could you go back to the previous slide there?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. You will have to cross the railroad tracks, but you will not need to cross either North Shore Drive or John Nolan on this path. So I just want to clarify if you have any concerns about the path, which is the thing that's on the agenda tonight.
Yeah, so am I still unmuted? Sorry.
No, you're
Yes,
okay.
you are.
Oh, okay. I love the path. My concern was with someone on the path that then has to go across, because there's the new crossing now.
So you're talking about like crossing John Nolan.
No, it's crossing North Shore on this. So the new path connects. There's no crossing there before. So now there's this new path that then you can connect.
But you cross at Broome instead of North Shore if you're on this path. Or am I misunderstanding?
No, so you can cross North Shore at that intersection on this path. You know what I mean? If you're going from North Shore, then if you're on in this photo that we're looking at now, if you're on the north side and you're going, or sorry, it's not north. It's if you're on the western side, which is the top of this one, and you're going to the left, which is south, right? Sorry, I'm all misoriented now. But if you're going left and you want to get on the Capital City Trail, so if you're going from that top path that's new, and then you want to go to the left and then down, basically, to get on the Capital City Trail.
Mhm.
Sorry, no. If you're, but yeah, either way, either if you're coming from the top or from the right on that upper path, if you're coming.
Maybe we should have.
Clear.
Aaron,
Sorry.
do you want to clarify, Aaron?
Yeah. So I do just want to first make the point that we are just, here looking for approval for the North Shore path, which is essentially from South Bedford Street to the Southwest path. Everything else that was shown was previously approved by TC.
Oh, I'm sorry. I goofed up then. I thought the Brittingham Park path was part of this approval process.
Gotcha.
My bad. Then I'm completely in the wrong. Then sorry.
Thank
No,
you. That was, I think, what I wanted to clarify, because I understand what you're talking about, your concerns about North Shore, but what we're approving tonight doesn't interact with North Shore in the least.
My apologies.
That's okay.
Okay.
And I thought maybe that would help Alder Harrington McKinney understand, that what your concerns are, not necessarily what the agenda item is. So
Yeah. I think because I think, Aaron, you included some bigger slides that, maybe people might have been a little bit confused about exactly what we were looking for tonight. So understandable, Gabriel. So, and a lot of discussion has occurred about that particular intersection, just at other meetings where we were looking at that particular topic. So, but it sounds like you're in support of the path that's proposed tonight.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry for sidetracking you guys.
Yeah, no, there was discussion about a lot of different things that you had. So Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
So thank you very much, Madam Chair. And what I really was after, and I'm glad that there was a clarification, because as I said, full disclosure, I'm not a biker, but I just wanted to make sure that there was adequate input into those decisions. And so that's why I know that Robbie is a biker, and I'm glad that she clarified me. I just wanted to make sure, based upon the registrant, that we were at a place that, that his concerns were answered and clarified. So I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the registrant? Okay, thanks much, Gabriel. Do we have anybody else, Aiden, on this item?
We have Nicholas Davies of Richard Street registered in support, but does not wish to speak.
Okay, all right, thank you. Comments or questions for Aaron? Harold?
Yeah, this looks wonderful. I'm very happy that the raised crossing of Bedford Street is included. So I guess that means that the bike path will be kept relatively level, whereas people going on Bedford Street will have to go raised crossing, right? That's how this is going to work.
Yep. It'll be as, the path crossing will be as level as we can make it while still maintaining drainage and the turning movements. We are somewhat constricted, but it'll definitely be somewhat of a speed hump, if not a full speed hump for cars. As much as we can raise it and still maintain drainage. And I didn't mention, but there will be some storm sewer work associated with that to make sure there's storm inlets on every corner.
Mm-hmm. One thing I was wondering, so if you drive on Bedford Street and you want to turn left onto North Shore Drive, I guess you have to stop kind of in the raised crossing to wait for a gap there, because that turn is permitted, right?
Yeah, and you can see where the stop bar is now. That turn is permitted, yes, and that stop bar is, right behind where the raised crossing kind of entrance ramp, if you're doing that movement, starts. So it does, the stopping isn't the same, but I'm sure what cars do now is they inch forward and they block that crossing today when they're making that left.
Right. With the difference that it's not a two-way multi-use path, which probably will generate much more traffic. But I guess the building on the corner, like you can't offset the crossing so that you would have queuing space on the other side of the crossing, right? Because the building is in the way of that on the whatever downside.
Yeah. The Findorf side here, this building is very tight, and it would be tricky to pull that back far enough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think
there's sorry, I didn't also mention, but there's also actually quite a bit of retaining wall here as well. That does further complicate some of that.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunate, but I think it's fine. The other question, so with the crosswalk across North Shore at Bedford, are there going to be, it looks like there's not going to be a separate ramp for that? That's
correct.
Be like,
I'm just showing the one ramp, which will be wider, but, somewhat similar to the existing, just a tighter radius. Yeah, there's not good space unless we pulled that crossing kind of way out of the intersection to fit in a separate ramp. We're also, this is funded through City Bikeways funds, and they're limited in funds, and we are trying to, use that money for a lot of other things. So working on doing this project, but keeping the costs down, as much as possible is important.
Yeah, makes sense. And I mean, I guess there's no reason that in the future you couldn't have that separate ramp a little bit further up. And yeah, it's a separate project. Okay. I think that's all I had. Great project.
Thanks, Harold. Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah, just a small question. Where the path crosses the driveway that goes into the apartment building, I think that's where it goes in. I think that's an apartment building right there. Are we going to have green paint to make sure that people coming in and out recognize that they need to yield to the path?
Yeah, definitely green paint won't be added there. I think that's probably a frequent enough driveway. It's commercial level. I'll talk with TE about any other signage or markings that could be helpful.
Okay. And then I guess if you could just pull the photo down just a little bit to the southwest path. There we go. So that there'll be the intersection, I guess you'd say, between this path and the southwest path. There'll be a turning radius so that people can make that turn easily. Is that right? I mean, it'll be there.
Yep. I widened it out to like 14, 15 feet, added a radius there. So sometimes it doesn't come in so well in these big exhibits, but there'll be pretty ample pavement there to make sure, that turn is smooth.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks. I think this will help a lot to avoid a couple of nasty crossings. I think that'll help people a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, it seems like a good alternative. Anybody have any other comments or questions? Aaron, were you just looking for reviewer feedback, or did you need a motion on this? Chris?
Great question. Yeah, Chris, maybe, or
Chris, I think we're just looking for review and feedback, are we not, or do you need a motion on this?
A review and feedback's fine.
Okay. Anybody have any other comments? A lot of good discussion, as usual. Okay, thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you all. Hope you have a good night.
All right, thanks, you too. Okay, next we have the 2025 Transportation Projects list. Chris.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Chris Pedikowski with City Engineering, here to talk today about our proposed project list for 2025 and kind of what things we might be bringing forward. going to share my screen here. All right. So as usual, we got a handful of reconstruct projects and resurfacing projects. In the past, I always used to kind of specify right away what I thought would come to TC with the new complete green streets. It's a little trickier for me to do that because if we design the streets completely with the, within the plan, the idea is that we don't bring them to you folks. So I'm gonna wing it here. So I didn't actually specify which ones would for sure come, but the way I organize this is I group by the shading here, like the white streets here are grouped together in one reconstruct project. So Pontiac, Nokomis, Rosewood, and Boston would all be together in one project. This one in particular is an unapproved or a roadway that doesn't have sidewalk on either side. So if we reconstruct it within the the neighborhood street guidelines and put sidewalk on both sides, I don't think it would come. If not, if we propose something different, we'd be bringing that to TC. Same situation on Davidson Park, Gary and Maher. Those are all streets with no sidewalks. That's very similar to the Davies Dempsey area that we just reconstructed in the last 2 years. So good chance that's coming to TC. Rusk Avenue is a part of our Badger Rusk path that was brought to TC this summer. Rutledge Street already brought to you folks that last summer. Evergreen, Ohio, and Summers is a very standard reconstruct. That neighborhood already has curb and gutter and sidewalks, so good chance that probably won't need to come to TC. Meyer Avenue, same situation there. There's sidewalk on that street from Glenway to Holly. Shawnee Pass and Nakoma, so that one will definitely be coming to TC's. What we're looking to do there on that one is install a sidewalk on the south side of Nakoma Road from Shawnee to Cherokee over in the Thoreau Middle School area. And then Sugar Maple is a very standard small connection between two developments, couple hundred feet. I'm pretty certain that we'll just match the normal CGS and won't have to come. So those are reconstructs. And if anybody's got any, I also included the tip map in the Legistar item. So if you want to find any of these streets, they show up in the 2025 red color. So there's Rutledge. Resurfacing are also on the tip map. They have a different shade. You'll see, like, for instance, this is East Main and Hancock it's like a lighter color with an outline. So those are our resurfacing projects, and those we don't have as much flexibility because we're not moving curbs, but oftentimes we might come with some marking changes and that sort of thing. So to be determined which one of these will be coming. Green Avenue, Flom Road, Franklin. Green Avenue, Flom, Franklin, East Manning, Hancock, Buffalo, Barron, Green, Lake, Gilbert, McKenna, Starker, and Midvale. So those are all projects. I'm thinking for sure Flom Road will be stepping into TC with a check-in. Also most likely Midvale Boulevard. And let's see, and McKenna was already at TC. I didn't mention it, but it already went to TC. Midvale Boulevard, our traffic engineers been working with the neighborhood to, they have some ideas about remarking on Midvale to see if we can add some bike lanes, so that'll be exciting. We'll bring that to TC pretty soon, I think. So those are the resurfacing projects. Again, if you want to take a look at the map, please do. PED bike projects. We always have our bikeways project that does path resurfacing. Bartolon Path came to TC last year. We'll be building that this summer, or sorry, next summer. Toncho Drive Path, we're hopeful to get that one approved at Parks Commission and built next summer as well. Safe Streets 2025. Right now we're working on the 2024 projects, getting those all designed and bid out. We bid half of them this summer, and then the second half we're due to bid this winter, and then we'll have a whole nother set for 2025 next year. Cannonball Path. This one is come to TC a number of times. We're going to have to come one more time because the OCR canceled our petition to cross the railroad. So we have another alternative plan to bring forward to you this fall, hopefully, to complete that last phase of the Cannonball Path. Hermina Bridge is already went to TC, but the bridge itself will be built next year. And then North Shore Drive, Aaron just talked to you guys about. So those are all the projects we have on the books. There's a bunch of private developments that come in, on the developer's schedule. So those will will be scheduled as we need them. And that is the list for 2025.
So Aiden, do I assume we don't have anybody registered to speak on this item?
Correct, we don't.
Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions for Chris? Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. For the bikeways resurfacing, do you know yet what's going to be in the schedule for that next year?
That is a good question. I believe we were looking at the Marlboro Park area. And then, unfortunately, North Shore Drive comes out of that pot. I'd have to look back on the list to see what else was scheduled. I know North Shore, Bartolon, and Marlboro Park was on the list that to come out of that account.
Okay.
I'd have to look if there was any others.
Yeah, I mean, I know we haven't done as many resurfacings in the last year or two. And so just making sure, I mean, these are great projects that we're funding, but also making sure that
there was one more. There's a stretch of the Cap City Trail that has a little bit of a timber wall that's fallen over just by like Dennett area. Dennett Drive area, that was on the list too. Sorry to interrupt you. But you're right. We haven't done as many resurfacings. We have been rating them, and we try to get to all the 5s or less. And the Marlboro was the last one that is a 5 right now.
Yeah.
Now I get the ratings every year, and actually we'll probably get them here very soon, and there'll be a few new ones. So we'll look at that too.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Anybody else have any other questions or comments for Chris? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Thanks, Chris. And Complete Green Streets works the way that it should. Some of these won't come, right?
That's right.
Okay. Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to item number 9. And Aiden, before we get started, I believe we have somebody registered to speak on this.
We do. We have one person.
Okay. So we'll hear from staff, and then we'll hear from the registrant, and then we'll go to discussion. So, Yang, who's going to be handling this tonight?
I will be.
Okay.
Yep. Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Tom
Tom.
Moore. Yep. Tom Moore, traffic engineering. I will share my screen. I've got a presentation here. So this agenda item is us in traffic engineering giving an update on the Raymond Road and Prairie Road intersection. So this came about due to a fatal crash last year. Strong Towns really analyzed the crash and the intersection, so we'll go through that a little bit. And a link to their information is also included on the agenda in Legistar. And then I'll just go through what we've done here in traffic engineering and what and how we plan to move forward. So here's the intersection. This is a recent aerial. Raymond Road, kind of going east-west, and Prairie Road going north-south. So the crash that we're talking about took place with a northbound right turn from Prairie to Raymond that involved a pedestrian in the street. So just a few images. This is just from Google Street View. So these cars here are queued up in the right turn lane. The left lane is for left turns and throughs, and the right is for right turns only. So this is kind of looking at the area where the crash occurred. This intersection previously was just stop signs on Prairie Road, and we signalized it in September of 2020. So fairly new signal. I do have a video to show. So this is a recent video from driving northbound on Prairie Road. So this would be from the view of the driver in the crash. So it's kind of looking both ways, and I'll come back to that later on. But the crash, just some background on that. It was 1:40 in the afternoon on Tuesday, August 1st. So good weather, good dry pavement. It was a northbound delivery truck that was turning right and struck a pedestrian. The crash report is available in the Strong Towns webpage. There's not a lot of detail in the narrative, and that's not unusual. Different crash reports have different levels of detail. It's really just up to the officer that writes up the crash report. It does say that the driver looked but did not see the pedestrian. No drug or alcohol use suspected, no damage to the vehicle, and like I said, dry, clear weather. So in that link to the Strong Town site, there's a lot of information. There's information, measurements of the intersection, information about the crash. There's a presentation that goes through it all, pictures, videos. And then they've got a list of recommendations, some immediate and some longer term items. I'm not going to go through all of them because it's a lot of information, so I would kind of leave that up to you to look at that. So just what did we do in traffic engineering? We viewed the Strong Towns presentation. We weren't part of it, but we did view it. Sean Malloy in our office met on site to look at the conditions at the intersection. Yeah, we thought it was a really good analysis, really in depth. They went through a lot of different things, and I think Josh Olson, who presented and kind of brought this up, is here tonight, so I think he'll speak on that too. But we agree with a lot of the recommendations. Earlier this summer, we restricted parking on eastbound Raymond to kind of open up the visibility at the intersection. So that's kind of this section here, where previously cars could park much closer to the intersection. There was brush in this tree area that we had cleared, and there was a tree closer to the intersection. So basically, what we would typically see here is that drivers would come up, familiar with the intersection. They kind of knew that they had to creep forward into the crosswalk area to see eastbound traffic to find a gap to turn right on red. So that visibility was really an issue with the right turns on red. So we did that earlier this summer. And then just recently, we decided to install the no turn on red signs and restriction. So, and that you can see here. So we've got the signs in place now. And this video, I might be jumping ahead of myself in the presentation, but this video kind of shows one of the major issues that was brought up in the Strong Towns presentation is this cabinet for the signals, how it blocks the view of pedestrians. And it wasn't stated in the crash report, so it's just speculation that was the issue. We don't know that. I think that could be a good guess. It's not unusual for us to install cabinets in this location, but there's a couple things or a few things here that's different from other intersections. One is that it's a newer cabinet, so it's larger. This cabinet's about 5 feet tall, but you can see the pedestrian who's about 6 feet tall. It's kind of a combination of the grade on Prairie Road. Right now we're lower and we're coming up in elevation to the intersection. The grade in the terrace that allows this cabinet to block the view of a pedestrian that's there. If it's driven correctly, the driver should stop here, look to the right, then look to the left, and there shouldn't be an issue. But based on observations, that's a lot of times not what the driver does. And we're not saying this is what happened I'm not saying this is what happened in the crash, but this is a type of condition that we do see where, especially drivers familiar with the intersection, they know they can kind of look as they're approaching the intersection and then get up, and as they're approaching the stop bar looking left. I'm sure everyone knows and has had similar experiences with this type of condition. So that's the reason that we just decided to go ahead and install the no turn on red signs. Let's see. So doing anything further, kind of the bigger, higher cost things that were part of the Strong Towns recommendation, this type of project is exactly what Safe Streets Madison was made for. So what we will do is look further into those items. There's a few things that we could do. We could we could relocate the cabinet signal or the signal cabinet. There's different places where we could put it. We could pull it further back, or we could put it on the kind of like the departure side of the intersection. We're estimating that would cost somewhere around $50,000. Another option that we want to look into more would be bumping out the curb here. The volumes are not high enough on Prairie Road to really need the 2 lanes like we have here. We can probably get away with 1 lane approach. And as you see further back, so we do have a bike lane as you head into the intersection, and it just kind of bike lane and parking, and it kind of turns into a shared lane situation. So we could extend the bike lane all the way up to the intersection, bump out that curb. Not sure exactly what that would cost right now. We'll have to look at the grading and utilities and exactly what that would involve, but that's something that we could look into. There were other recommendations for doing things on Raymond Road. I think that would be part of a bigger Raymond Road project that just starts to get into a lot of other things, but it's something to think about. So yeah, here's a picture. Again, same thing from the video. So like I said, further analysis, we'll rank it in Safe Streets Madison. We plan to come back with the next round of Safe Streets Madison projects sometime probably this winter. So this would likely be a part of that. Because there was a fatality here, it will rank high in Safe Streets Madison, just because of how the ranking process works. But I kind of want to talk about how we evaluate individual fatal crashes. So we do typically take a look at each fatal crash and see if there's something that we can do. As mentioned by Strong Towns, there wasn't a lot of publicity around this one. This was this crash happened in August of last year. It wasn't really flagged for publicity, I guess. But when we do hear about fatalities, we do take a look at it, see what were factors in the crash, and see if there's anything that we can quickly do. But overall, when we're looking at crash projects and crash mitigation, we're more looking at patterns of crashes. In this location, since we installed the signals, there have only been 3 crashes, so 2 other crashes beside this one. One was December 23rd, 2022, a driver lost control on an icy road. And the other was a driver on Raymond Road fell asleep. So overall, beside the fatality, it had been a pretty safe intersection, and we're more looking at the higher crash intersections when we're trying to evaluate for safety measures. But this was a good one to that Strong Towns brought up and analyzed, and I think there are things that we can do here to help, and that we have done. I think one of the things with no turn on red restrictions is the compliance, and that may be. I think that will be something we're going to look at here. We're going to see what the compliance rate is for this location for the no turn on red restriction. So we'll do that kind of in the meantime while we're analyzing and evaluating other projects. But yeah, we just wanted to bring this here, give you an update on where we're at and what we've done, and that kind of concludes my presentation. I do have another video. So this is just a recent view. I'll kind of speed it up and you can kind of see this was before we installed the no turn on red, but there is a high volume of right turns and drivers do pull forward. So we'll continue to look at this and see how it works with the no turn on red restriction. So there, yeah, it was a driver that kind of just rolled through.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of right turns.
So yeah, we're from you tonight. We're kind of looking at what are your overall thoughts on what we've done so far, and if you had any strong thoughts about what to look at further for a project.
Okay, thanks, Tom. When this happened, the Strong Towns crash analysis happened last July. I did send out the registration for the live session to TC members and also a link to recorded sessions, which you could view it after the fact. So my understanding was that nobody from the City of Madison was participating. Nobody from City of Madison staff participated in the live session. And we didn't have an opportunity to ask live questions, but there was a lot of information and there were some residents from Madison. Josh, I believe, who's here registered to speak, participated. So that's just a little background. And I did talk with Yang and others about follow-up on this because it was of great interest to me and to a lot of other people, which is why we're here at TC talking about it tonight, and we'll continue to talk about it. So before we go further, why don't we hear, I believe Josh is here. So Josh, you would have 3 minutes tonight.
Can you hear me?
We can, thanks.
Awesome. Yes. Hello. Yeah, my name is Josh Olson. I was the one that kind of helped coordinate this and did a lot of the speed study and the measurements of the streets, kind of just like on my own. Sat in my car a couple of times with a radar gun. It was a very interesting process and kind of learning and seeing what drivers are doing. Thank you to city staff for actually meeting with me at one point to kind of talk about the intersection, as well as like looking into what Strong Towns was suggesting. A couple points that I want to make. One, this wasn't picked for any specific reason in terms of like need. The whole Strong Towns ethos is find something in your neighborhood or on your street that you can improve and then make that improvement and then rinse and repeat. So this intersection was 2 blocks away from my old apartment, and I didn't know that someone had died, even though I had lived in my apartment at the time when that crash took place. I was not aware. My eyes saw that there was flowers around the street pole, so that's what got me interested in it. I definitely really appreciate the fact that we made it more visible for drivers that are looking to their left. I think that's a great fix. I do think if we could focus, at least from my perspective, one thing that I think we could be doing better is kind of like the recommendation on using temporary traffic control devices to respond quickly to this instance. I think having an opportunity to try and test what moving to one lane would actually look like without putting in permanent infrastructure would be beneficial to understand, do cars actually not lean into that right turn as much? Are they slowing down? Are they seeing pedestrians? So rather than committing to the permanent funds that it would take to get that infrastructure, can we just actually see study-wise, are people starting to behave the way that we want them to? I was out there with my friends after the crash analysis, measuring how many people took a right turn without stopping at that bar from the Strong Towns person. His recommendation, he happened to be on site with us, so he was like, this is interesting, here's what I would do, blah, 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 blah. And we counted about 100 cars turning right. I think 91 did not stop properly at the bar. They went beyond the bar. I think there was like 6 drivers that just went right through it on a right red. Didn't even stop at all, like no official stop. 5 cars made the correct right turn. 4 of them were on a green light, and one of them was a Strong Towns Madison kind of member who was dropping off the radar gun at the beginning of the test. So I would love to kind of see the city as they approach that right turn compliance. If that's something that we can look at when we have the 2 lanes versus 1 lane, can we just put some cones out there and see if temporary measures result in better compliance? So I guess I'll also plug at the same time that Strong Towns came out with like a much greater applies to every city, not just a crash analysis guide for how to handle these kinds of situations. And I think the 2 recommendations, one I just reviewed is the using temporary traffic control devices to respond quickly. But the second one that they recommend is establishing a crash response team, which I think Madison would do well to have someone doing this every time we have someone who dies. And publicly like publishing the results and kind of what we're planning on doing. I'm sure that when this happened last August, there were ideas. And I think some of those ideas could have been implemented by September of 2023 rather than September or October of 2024. So I'm willing to take questions if you've got them or comments you want to talk about this. It was a very interesting experience, and I was glad I was able to do it. And I'm very satisfied and happy that the city is taking this seriously.
Thanks, Josh. Are there any questions for the registrant? Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate, Josh, that you did this. I think it was, I live nearby, within a half a mile, and I did not recall this fatality getting any publicity whatsoever. And I think it rightly deserves. And I see that Alder McKinney is also has her hand raised because this is her area. It's either in her district or close to it. We have known, and we've talked with law enforcement when they make their quarterly report, that Raymond Road is a way too fast facility, that traffic speeds are way too high. So, I mean, I'm very surprised that there hasn't been more crashes at this location, because I drive through it quite often. And the speeds are just, as your study showed, that the 85th percentile speed is very high, and it's not. And I'm sure this isn't the only street like this in Madison, but I think, and we'll attest to that. But I think this is very indicative of these kinds of facilities that are driven the way they are. And I think that I appreciate your work on this, Josh. So that I will have some other thoughts after we get into discussion about this. But I wanted to thank you, Josh, for doing this.
Thanks, Bill. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
So I'll just be very brief. Josh was in District 20 and he moved on me, but the fact that he brought this forward, and so I want to publicly thank him for that, because he actually instituted this on his own. But I also want to recognize city staff, traffic engineer, Director Tao, and President Kovich, who took this on and brought it before us, and the compliance issue. And so since I've been on transportation, I'm noticing the compliance issue is huge. I mean, to see how many people don't stop at the turn red light. A red stop sign. And so it's something that, because one fatality, as Yang would say, is too many. And so, for us to bring this before us and start looking at it, how can we, within budget constraints, try to have drivers be compliant, because I see it driving all the time, is that people are not compliant in terms of, it says no right turn there, but they're still bearing through the lane. So I just want to acknowledge and thank Josh publicly and transportation publicly for moving on this as they did.
Thanks, Alder. Thanks, Josh. We appreciate your comments and appreciate your work on the Strong Towns crash analysis. And while it doesn't mitigate the fact that there was a fatal accident, an interesting observation. I know some of you, along with me, are registered to get updates from the Madison Police Department incident reports on a daily basis, and this was not in the incident reports. And at one of our TC meetings, we commented on that, and Lieutenant Hanna has changed that now so that those will be reported. It's, a mystery to me as to what gets into those incident reports, but that at least, we can have more awareness of, for sure, fatal injuries, but hopefully serious injuries as well. Pepe, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, I want to echo, the thanks to Josh for all the work done. I feel like the work that you're doing, Josh, is making a difference here. So appreciate it. And I have a question for you. So you mentioned, testing, doing testing with cones, etc., as one possible action items. And you also mentioned that there are other potential actions that could be taken that you have researched and then you have seen in other places. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that, those other actions that could be taken in the short term?
So it's a question for Josh, Pepe?
It is.
There he is. Okay, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah. So I think it was a great happenstance that the technical expert from Strong Towns, who I did the study with, he was in Madison during the week that we were going to do it. So he actually got to walk the site with us, which was a really interesting experience, something he hadn't been able to do for the other studios he was a part of. So he pointed out the grade as an issue, which I wouldn't have thought of just as a not super technical person. But from his perspective, I think he really hammered home the volume is not indicative of needing 2 lanes, which is why he recommended just putting cones from the S-bar, whatever it's called, to the bike lane. And just for 4 hours, have someone out there kind of do the same analysis that we were doing on our own, even just putting a camera, which it sounds like maybe you're doing with the right on red option, and just checking to see if compliance is any better. The other recommendation that I was kind of going on was, I can't remember which cities have done this. I think maybe Cincinnati, can't remember exactly, but it's the crash response team was another thing that he told me would be beneficial to Madison, which is you don't have to do it immediately after you have a person that dies. Of course, you don't want to get in the way of emergency medical personnel, what have you. But within the week, it's important to kind of digest what the environment was while the crash had happened. And then from there, assessing, documenting, and evaluating which factors probably contributed the most to the crash. And then kind of from there, diving deeper into that analysis and coming up with what can we do tonight or tomorrow to try and make this a more safe intersection? What can we do in the next couple months, and what can we do in the next year? So I don't have many other recommendations beyond the ones that we've already discussed here. Like, I think that signal box is fairly large. I have a funny photo of like 5 of us where there are 5 people technically in the picture, but you can only see 4 of them. So definitely in some scenarios, I think that contributes to not being able to see people. But removing the extra the foliage was one that was identified that I think was a really quick thing that we could do. Making parking more visible, that was another good one. I think the rest of them kind of move towards Raymond Road, which is difficult. And also another thing to recognize is that this is not the only intersection that is vertical to a horizontal Raymond. There are dozens on Raymond Road, and there are schools in the area, and there's a library and businesses and homes. So like it's tough, but I would also say we might want to check the rest of those intersections and see if we're running into the same issues that we're seeing here, and if there's anything that we can do really short term to just fix things, even if it's not necessarily needing that testing for this the right turn lane, even if it's a 1-laner. So does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Thank you, Josh. And once again, thanks for bringing that other bigger issue up, because that's where my mind was going to. Of like sometimes we get blinded by the single issue in one intersection, try to solve that one intersection when we might be looking at a bigger problem here. I'm with you on that one. So yeah, I mean, the fact that people have to rush through that turn kind of speaks to the speeds that we see in Raymond Road, and I would love to see, like, at the moment that we go into like potential solutions, I would love to see something that is more integral to the whole area or to the whole surroundings of Raymond Road, as opposed to just a one fix for a one corner there.
Agreed. And I there was like another funny happenstance where I happened to catch one of those MPD speed traps that they had set up on Raymond Road. So I kind of just pulled over and I talked to some of the officers that were conducting it, and had like a 15-minute chat. And they're saying like they caught someone going 68 that night. I caught someone going 73. And he was saying consistently they're seeing this. They did it like 5 times during that month, just happened to overlap with what we were doing. But there are, even if like normal drivers are going just a little bit above the speed limit, but not too much, and like we don't want to consider those, there are so many of these single outliers that I have serious concerns about. And there's a library further up Raymond Road that I watch kids cross the street not using the RFB or like the signalized intersections or anything like that. They're just going into the median and then waiting for cars. And I'm just like, that's the perfect example of what this program is for. Like the Crash Analysis Studio, like their motto is no second person should have to die on a dangerous street. And I'm thinking like, man, there are so many of these near misses that I can watch. So yeah, it's definitely indicative of the entire area, but that takes resources. So
mm-hmm. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, that's all I have for now, Chair. I'll come back with other questions, comments for Tom. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Robbie, go ahead.
So this may not be actually, I guess we're still on questions for Josh. I did want to just thank him for doing this, and I did attend the webinar on this, which was very informative. I guess I'll just jump into one comment that isn't necessarily a question for Josh, but this is just sort of an FYI. In the last day, there has been a very long, very heated thread on Nextdoor. I know I shouldn't read Nextdoor, but I do sometimes. And because someone asked, why are there so many no right turn on red signs around the city? And so it's been a very interesting discussion, but I think that if there was a way to explain to the general public, there's an opportunity, I should say, to explain to the general public why no right turn on red signs are popping up all across the city. Some of them have to do with, say, the new path on Mineral Point or elsewhere. I think Jerry Shippa was the one who pointed out to me that the best practices and professional guidance says that there should be no right turn on red across a path, a side path, or a like pedestrian path, such as on Mineral Point. But I think some of them might also have to do with the BRT. It seems to be fairly common on streets where there is BRT now, and maybe there's some other reasons. And obviously, this one is one where we put one up after a crash. But I think it would be very useful for people to be able to read in the paper or hear on TV interview or something like that about why no right turn on red is becoming more prevalent. And I may try and do a little media discussion in my own, wearing my other hat at some point in the future. But I will also suggest that they talk to the city staff about that. I think it's something that people need to understand, but that's going into discussion and not necessarily about this intersection in specific or this crash specifically, but no right turn on red in general. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, Yang or Tom, do you have any comments? Because, no right on red is something that there's been a lot of conversation about that across the country. Some towns are making it no right on red anywhere in their towns. So, Yang or Tom, any comments about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start on that. Maybe Tom can, add to it. Our residents are correct that there are, quite a few more red on red popping up in the city, and we also got a request from some residents to implement a citywide no turn on red restriction, which actually some cities have done that. A few cities have done that in the country. That's definitely, we're doing that. We're taking, approach that's more appropriate to our situation. We do it on an individual basis. And, but really, when we see a good reason to do so, we're adding it. So that's why you are seeing so many of them right now. But I want to give a few more remarks, but I'm going to wait for that after we finish this topic and after Delise had a chance to speak as well.
Sure.
Tom, anything to add? I saw two Toms are here, so.
Yeah, Tom, did you have anything?
There's two Toms, and both Toms probably have something to add. The no rights turn on red on Mineral Point Road, which has generated some controversy, really is associated with that side path. And just to minimize the conflicts in life with that side path, we have the same thing that goes on the east side at First Street. So it's really just, I think it's becoming it's become a bigger deal than maybe it really should be. This is just trying to protect cyclists at maybe 5 intersections. So that's not as big a deal as far as the universal policy of no turn on right. That's being advocated around the United States. Yet I've also seen some research that says that like less than 0.5% of crashes have anything to do with the right turn on the red. And so I think it's something that's being highly advocated for, but when you look at the actual statistics, the number of crashes that are associated with that particular movement is quite small. And so it's not like this universal panacea. And because of that, I kind of support Yang and his case-by-case thing. It's not so much that we're opposed to a universal no right turn on red, but I don't think the number of crashes that it would really prevent isn't necessarily what you might hear in a lot of blogs and like. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Tom. Other Tom?
Yeah. And I mentioned it before, but one thing I want to do is look at the compliance. And I think at least my anecdotal observations have been that the compliance is kind of specific to the site. It seems like we give pretty good compliance up around the square. And then further out, compliance isn't as good, but we're going to look into that. And we recently, I don't know how much we have discussed this at Transportation Commission, but we've got a new crash software to analyze crashes, and it makes it much easier to do that. So we're going to work with them on being able to pinpoint, right turning crashes and right turning crashes involving pedestrians. And we're kind of right in the middle of the process of getting that up and running. But once we have that, that's really going to be helpful in, I think, adding these where, like Tom said, and Yang, where they're needed. And it's kind of like any other sign. When you put in unneeded signs, they start to get ignored. So we've got to be careful about where we place them.
Okay, thanks. Denise, go ahead.
Audio now unmuted. Thanks. I really appreciate this discussion a lot. Josh, thank you for your work on this, and staff, thank you for being really responsive. So when I look at this intersection specifically, it just seems like there were a lot of circumstances that led to a bad situation. So with the big box, with the right turn on red, with people doing a little bit of wide open spaces with those two lanes, and then with the brush. So it sounds like good things have been done to kind of combine those factors to reduce the risk. I really appreciate Josh's suggestion about doing a temporary reduction to one lane and seeing how that impacts driver behavior. So I'm always super interested in, when a really sad situation like this happens, what are the lessons learned that can be applied elsewhere, and kind of have us back up to what we learn here, how does that factor into Vision Zero? How does that factor into Safe Green Streets? That big box. And when I encounter them, they make me really nervous. I mean, I'm 4'10", so I'm not even as tall as the box. So I'm going to be completely obscured by it, to a motorist. There are situations where the right turn on red, I think, does make no right turn on red makes an enormous amount of sense. And I'm glad that staff are evaluating those on a case-by-case basis. I certainly get a lot of constituents who want to see the universal no right on red. And so, I do education about where it makes sense and where it doesn't make sense. But as a blind pedestrian, I can't look in that car window and see, is the driver looking towards me? Do they see me? I have no ability to do that. So I think when we hear, particularly from more vulnerable pedestrians, that wanting there to be a universal right on red, it comes from that fear that we're not being seen and we don't have the ability to see if the driver's paying attention to us. So just to set a little context about why there's a lot of folks that are pretty animated about a universal right on red. The other thing I'd love to see is intersections evaluated when you're putting in the electronics about those boxes and where might those be placed or how might they be placed so they're not obscuring pedestrians coming down the sidewalk, because little kids and short adults, we get completely obscured by them. So yeah, so that's I think my comment, and then maybe my question is how, with the crash analysis software that you're implementing, with looking at this particular intersection, how does it impact lessons learned that can be applied in other places in the city? So, yeah, I think that's what I want to ask about it.
Tom Yang's comments.
Well, with this one, I kind of just started looking around the city at different signal cabinet locations, and I found a lot of locations where they're on the approach like this one is, and there's different reasons for placement of them, but the cabinets are bigger now than what they used to be. So I think it is something we're going to have to be more careful with in the future, where in the past you could get away with kind of putting them wherever, but we in the past we kind of tried to locate them off the main street to avoid them being hit by someone leaving the road. So that might have to be a secondary condition or consideration versus visibility. But yeah, we will just this crash and analysis is just an example. It gets us. We're like I said, we're right in the middle of meeting with our the software engineers on the crash software. So this is a perfect timing for us to be able to kind of implement some of these crash queries, to identify these types of crashes much easier, where in the past, there was just really no way of kind of identifying this level of detail, like citywide. It's just kind of something that would happen on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, so thank you, Tom. Delise, I think, asked a really good question. So thank you, Delise. So I will, add a few thoughts in addition to Tom's. But I would like to start, by, thanking Josh and Strong Town, for taking initiative, for doing a study. So we really appreciate it. And I also want to thank my staff as well, for taking this very seriously and not being defensive. Sometimes it's easy to, to do that as a professional, but really, trying to, implement that, things that really make sense, and also look into what resources we have, think of different ways to do as much as we can. And respond very, quickly once we learn about it. So especially, Tom and Sean, for the quick response. And I really appreciate, Chair Kovich, for working with us as well, for bringing this to the commission. And I want to thank for the commissioners, for the thoughtful, comments so far. And I appreciate the Alder Harrington McKinney for always being a champion, for safety. So we really appreciate. I really view this, exercise as an opportunity for us to improve more. Even though I think some people may argue that medicine is doing pretty well on traffic safety. We are ranked as a second safety city for pedestrians. From recent ranking among the largest 101 metropolitan areas. But as Alder Harrington McKinney pointed out, even one death is too many. I firmly believe that. Regarding, I think how can we apply what we learned to citywide? I think that's a really good point. I think that's probably the most important thing that we can get out of this this study. Because that overall, as Tom mentioned, this intersection actually, if we look at the citywide data, right? Tom showed the heat map of safety problems. This one really does not stand out from those. This crash, this fatal crash, is an isolated case, but that tells us that this kind of isolated case can happen anywhere in the city. So we really got to think hard on how can we prevent all of this in the future, given the resources we have. So yeah, I think that's another thing that as a city, as a community, we need to think is that how do we allocate our resources? I think some tools we're building, like Tom mentioned, the crash analytic software that we are building. I think that's going to be tremendously helpful to us. So I think we got to realize that this kind of crash can happen anywhere. So like in every for every street design, every intersection, we got to be very mindful where place stands, for example. For those traffic signal cabinets, we do need a location for it, right? It serves a good purpose. It makes the signal functional, but in the meantime, it does create some visual blockage. So how to balance that? I think that's a really good question, especially the industry where industry moving. These things are getting bigger and bigger. So I also want to touch quickly on some of the suggestions brought up by Josh and Strong Tong. Some of the we discussed previously. Regarding the tests right after crashes, I think that's definitely a good idea. That we agree with that. But we do have very constrained resources. But I do think doing a thorough test probably won't do it justice. So typically we like to do it a little bit longer. We like to get more data so we can evaluate more. Since we already sent devices out, we may want to leave it longer. But I want to point out those things are pretty labor intensive as well. Sometimes almost it's easier for us to use capital funds to do a permanent improvement than finding staff resource which we don't have to do the temporary tests. But that's something we're going to work on. Something that we as a community we can talk about. Another thing that brought up is rapid response team after high profile crash it happens. So we actually recently started doing that after being a meeting together with Jersey City, New Jersey. So they talk about their they have a rapid response team, and we thought that's a good idea. So we actually started that doing that. One example actually is a recent response we provide on West Washington Avenue at Southwest Path after the last serious injury crash. We're glad that for that case it was not a fatality, but serious injuries is not any better. So we respond to that one right away because that one we already know that previous cases, and we identified a pattern. So I think that one makes sense for us to react right away, and we use temporary devices close the lanes on West Washington Avenue, so that that's still there today. However, though, we're being very careful on setting precedents, because once we start to do something new, we got to do it, for everyone, for every case. Again, I think that we're so resource constrained, so we are being very careful designing what our rapid response is going to look like, and we also plan to bring that conversation, that update, for West Washington Avenue test to this body a little bit later. Once we think about it a bit more, look at the resources, look at what might be possible, and also as we gather more data, from a test. So I'll stop there. I think there's a lot to discuss. I think this example is a really good one that really, I think, brought a lot of really good things. Again, thanks to our residents like Josh and also Strong Town for helping us out. And we definitely keep improving. And again, I think our goal is zero death in the city of Madison. So thank you.
Thanks, Yang. A lot of great discussion, and I think this was a wonderful example of residents in our community getting involved and having the opportunity to have Strong Towns do a crash analysis and have us benefit from further discussion and analysis from the city's point of view and from the Transportation Commission's point of view as well. So other comments or questions at this point? It sounds like we'll see more from Safe Streets Madison likely in the future.
Yep, I think so. Yep.
Okay. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just get into discussion when we had, after we got done with Josh. I might have a thought about this, and I listened very, to what Robbie said, and I had that same concern. I do read Nextdoor, okay? City transportation, traffic engineering is getting raked over the coals by a number of people in their comments. And the right turn on red is one of the issues that they're I don't know, I guess I use the word they're upset, okay? And I think we should use this opportunity with the information that Josh collected the data I think what the city is doing is correct of doing the right turn on red installations on a case by case basis. And perhaps, yes, maybe there are more going up, but I think we want to take maybe the opportunity to explain that and educate our citizens about this. I think we could do a press release or something to get it out. You don't have to use Nextdoor. It could get if a press release to the state journal or to out to the public and put it on the city website and so forth about the compliance rate is not very good in the city of Madison right now, and it's getting worse. And I think that the data that Josh collected at this location is indicative of other locations, at most locations, of people not doing a complete stop before they make a right turn on red. They're rolling through these maneuvers, and I think we should try to educate our drivers that when you have that much data for 100, that's a good count. And how many citizens are not doing it correctly? That needs to be brought to the attention of everybody. And I think we should take advantage of this and get that word out to the public. But at the same time, telling the people that I agree with doing it on a case by case basis of where a new right turn on red sign should be, because I will tell you the movements that I make where the sign is up, people are ignoring them. Okay, so we've got to have compliance, and so I think it's just we're not just doing it willy nilly because we're trying to aggravate our citizens, the drivers that we're concerned about bicyclists, and we're concerned about our pedestrians, and I think that point needs to be made to our citizens. So I would advocate a press release and get the information out and try to educate people that are willing to listen as to why we're doing some of these things to try to improve safety at some of these intersections. So it's I don't know if anybody from the staff looks at some of the social media, but they're just not happy. I think we're not doing citizens. We're after the drivers is what they think they were doing. But anyway, so I don't know, Yang or Tom or Tom, any thought about getting this kind of the information that you've got it now from this one location and taking advantage of it and try to do some education. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yeah, we'll definitely need to look into. I think it's a good suggestion. Yeah, it could be very good. So yeah, so we'll look into what maybe we can do. But I think some of the things we pay attention is that we don't want people feel like you see that people are not obeying the signs anyways. Why putting them up, right? Yeah, but I think bring better educating them on the need of the sign, on the need of obeying the sign. I think that's important, and also telling them that there's also communities are doing this like blanket right everywhere, whether it's it's most needed or not. They're doing it. So yeah, I can see change is always hard for people. This is one change that our drivers may feel like they're inconvenienced. But I think sharing the information with them would be a good thing. But I think definitely thinking like we want to do it thoughtfully, carefully, so that it has the effect that we want to achieve, and also not confuse people. So thank you, Bill, for suggestion.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Is that all you had? Yeah. Okay. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
This has been just a very fruitful conversation, and I wanted to move on the educational piece. And so my question is that as a body, and so immediately I was thinking about, we should do a public information meeting, but then I want to bring it back to this body. Is it possible when we're talking about education, specifically the right turn on red? I mean, as it was noted, is that Next Door is really blowing this up. Could it be an educational piece that, and tell me if it's not possible, that the Transportation Commission could sponsor an educational piece? And we have Yang, we have Tom that have been talking about the right turn, and how can we as the Transportation Commission bring that educational piece in-house and do a public information meeting, or however we want to call it? Because I think that from where many of us sit, the right turn on reds, and I see it every day, is that the compliance is very minimum, but the complaints about it is huge and it's growing. And I think that educating the public and letting the public know the whys would help. And it's a lack of education. And so my question is that could this body put on a public information session where we talk about the right turn on red and why we're doing it, and so forth? Would that be?
I mean, we could certainly bring it to Transportation Commission as a topic in the future. I certainly want to talk to staff about that. I don't know, staff, if you want to think about ideas, if you want to actually do a separate session or something like that, or just handle it with like a news release. So I don't know, Yang, did you have thoughts about that? Or you want to just take that offline and study it further?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the session definitely has value. Yeah, but I think that definitely takes a lot of effort. Press release another way to go. How about that? Let's discuss more offline. Let's figure out a way to move forward. But I definitely agree that some education, some outreach on this would be a good idea.
Okay, so we'll take that offline and study it further and maybe report back to TC at some point in the future. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on that thought because I've been thinking a lot about the ability of the commission and the city to communicate with the public. I think doing that effectively is a much heavier lift than we all realize, and takes a completely new way of thinking, because just observing even like the BRT rollout, which we all here would have assumed was broadcasted across every sort of news outlet there was, you would think people had not heard of it when it was rolling out. So it's I think it's well beyond what we're capable of doing in our typical ways here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Alder Harrington McKinney.
So, Yang, I want to notify you now is that I will be contacting you offline, and District 20 will be connecting with you to do an educational piece around the right turn. So I just want you to be aware of that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I think definitely, it's easier to do, on a neighborhood district basis than the informational session at the commission. But we can also, discuss that possibility, or like a citywide campaign, like press release. But I think Chris is right. Not sure how effective it's going to be, how many people are going to reach, but at least we should try. However, though, I think we'll be happy to go to the different district neighborhoods to engage the neighbors on that. I think oftentimes, others like you are very effective at reaching out to the residents and gathering people up, share information, so create opportunities for us to provide the information, provide the education. So thank you, Alder. Appreciate that.
Haro, go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly along those lines, one idea of something that I think the city has done in past years anyway, which, so it's maybe not as much additional effort. The World Day of Remembrance for Road Traffic Victims is coming up, I think November 17. I just Googled it. And I know the city we have done, I think, a press conference for that last year, if I remember correctly. So maybe thinking about can this tie into
2 years
this?
Now. Yeah, and we just had a meeting at the Vision Zero steering team today talking about that. So we have something planning for this year as well. For mid-November. Great point.
Okay. All right, great. A lot of great discussion. More work and follow-up will come to TC. Anything further? Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks to Josh, thanks to Strong Towns, thanks to city staff, thanks to all of you, thanks to everybody for your interest on this very, very important traffic safety issue and issues. So more to follow on this in the future. So thanks everybody. Okay, item 10 is an update from the Transportation Commission Appeals Subcommittee hearing. We actually had 2 hearings last night, and my thanks to Denise and Bill for joining me on the Appeals Subcommittee. It's sensitive and demanding work. Really, really is sensitive and demanding work. We had an appeal of a denial of a taxi cab license application by Anthony Foy, and it was our decision to reverse that denial and approve his application. There was also an appeal of a denial of a renewal of a taxi cab license for Theodore K. And in that particular case, the subcommittee upheld the denial. It was an unusual situation, and there's a current pending case, and we did encourage him to, if appropriate, reapply in the future, which we have done in situations like that in the past. So, again, my thanks to staff and both at the police department and traffic engineering, as well as the members of the subcommittee, because again, it can be sensitive and demanding work. So, thanks to everybody with regard to that. Anybody have any questions for us? Okay, thanks so much. Next we have
And I just wanted to jump in and say that the captain from the City of Madison Police Department, Captain Worley, is doing an outstanding job in his review and flagging any and bringing these to our for good reasons. That it's good to have another set of eyes on the cases, and he agreed with that, and he agreed with our decision. So it wasn't like he felt bad that we were overriding his decision. He had appropriate reasons to flag him and bring him to a TC committee for review.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think this is the third appeal that he's been involved in. And so he's relatively new to it, but he has done it's Eugene Worley, and he's Captain Eugene Worley, and he really has done a good job. And he was very careful. The one that we reversed the denial, he was very careful to say, but this is why we have the process, that all he sees is the paperwork. And when the people come and explain things and have an opportunity to talk about it, it really justifies why we have this appeal process in place. So thanks for recognizing that, Bill. Denise, did you have anything else to add? No? Okay. All right. Great. And thanks again to both of you for your participation and for those additional comments as well. Okay. Next we have item 11, which is any reports or comments from members who are members of other transportation-related BCC. Does anybody have any comments tonight? Robbie?
Yeah, at last month's joint campus area committee, they brought up the UW is continuing to do studies on the Lakeshore Path, the possibility of paving and or lighting it. And although this is a UW, it's part of the UW Lakeshore Nature Preserve. And so, of course, they can do as they wish with their path. I did point out that it is it's an important transportation facility for people across, basically anybody who's on the west side of Madison, or even if they're not coming to campus, they may be coming to the downtown and using that facility, and that it's an very important connection. I don't know if there's a way to get some sort of joint or some sort of presentation on what they're thinking. I don't know if, they're going to have more outreach sessions, and I will try and let committee members know when those are happening. But I don't know if they would be amenable to having having them come to this body to say what's on their mind or what they're thinking or what they're hearing, or I don't know. And I don't know what the timing, when that would be appropriate, but I'm just thinking it might be something we might want to pursue. So that's the update, and that's where they are. Nothing is Nothing has been decided. They're just going to have continued hearings and accept public input. So that's all of that.
Okay, I'll make a note on our future agenda items, as that might be something that we might want to pursue in the future. The possibility. Thanks, Robbie. Harold?
Yeah, thanks. From Board of Public Works last week, you saw Tom Nitch's director's report. You noticed an item about the traffic signal at Whitney Way at Mineral Point being delayed. However, the more interesting piece of this for Transportation Commission is that we talked about the newly constructed widened sidewalk there and how at some of the driveway crossings there are now detectable warning fields in the pavement, which is something that so far has not been done before. And apparently this is one of the impacts that the new PROAG guidelines have, where apparently now for driveway crossings, there is supposed to be a detectable warning field. So we might see more of that. We might have to think about what are some of the potentially unintended consequences of that. Like if a driver sees the detectable warning field, is there an assumption that they have the right of way, which they do not? So I'm sure we will encounter this in the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I had.
Okay. Thanks. Anybody have any other reports from other BCCs? Okay, thanks. With regard to announcements by the chair, Darren resigned from TC, but the reason he resigned from TC was he was appointed to the Plan Commission. So he went off TC, but went on to the Plan Commission. So we'll certainly miss him, but the Plan Commission will benefit from his participation there. So at this point in time, we currently have 2 vacancies on TC. So we'll watch to see what happens in the future with regard to those. Okay. Next, we have future agenda topics. This point, we've got the folks from B-Cycle and from actually Helen Bradley's going to work for Bicycle Transit System. So I believe Helen's scheduled to come to TC on October 30th to talk about that change in ownership that you mentioned last time, Harold. So she wanted to wait until the 30th because she thought she'd have a little bit better understanding of what was going on. And Metro Transit Safety Plan, Midtown Raymond High Point project. We're going to talk about capital and operating budgets in terms of transportation. If Lieutenant Hanna can make it, we'll have a quarterly traffic safety report, and we'll certainly look at anything else that we have coming in. And we certainly have a number of things already planned for the November meeting as well. We have a bunch of things on the list for future agenda topics, along with, looking at the city's ADA compliance plan and PROAG, which we talked some about tonight. So that's something that we'd like to look at some point as well. I've got it potentially in November, but certainly we need to talk to a lot of people about that before we would have a conversation here about it. So just on there as a placeholder at this point. Any other? So Robbie, I just added presentation at TC on the Lakeshore Path with a question mark. So we can tag that on our list of potential topics and certainly circle back with you about how we might potentially make that happen. Other future agenda topics that haven't been mentioned in the past that you want to get on the list. Okay. All right. As usual, a lot of great discussion tonight. So thanks everybody for that. Your participation and contributions are always so much appreciated. We need a motion to adjourn. Robbie.
Move adjournment.
Alder Martinez Rutherford.
I will be happy to second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. And I'm going to assume nobody's going to object or want a roll call vote. So I'm assuming a unanimous consent vote. And thanks, everybody. Another great meeting. Talk to you soon. Thanks.